Shut up, compressor. Hey everyone, I'm Matt with Doogs Models, and this is the Flankoff. Okay, now that the intakes are done, I'm going to turn my attention to the control surfaces. So by that I mean the flaps, which you see already placed, the leading edge slats, and then if we turn it over here, the stabilators, which go here, the tail, which will mount at least on the Kitty Hawk right here, and maybe, just maybe, these lower strakes. So this is going to be interesting, especially because my mind is currently addled by a little yipping dog somewhere in the neighborhood that has been barking constantly for the last hour. You might hear the plaintive yelps coming through the speakers or the headphones that you might be wearing. Well, it's even more annoying in real life. So, as annoying as some of these steps in these builds can be, they'll be doubly so with that little dog. So, I know this is the Kitty Hawk. We're going to start with the Great Wall and the leading edge slats. So the Great Wall slats are made up of two pieces, a top and a bottom, as you can see here. Now the nice thing about the Great Wall kit, and their two-piece slats at least, is as you can see here, there is an edge, so you're not having to glue edge on edge right along the leading edge of the leading edge slat. Instead, they lock just behind the edge, so you have room to clean up and sand and all that good business. Unfortunately, they are, because they're so small and a little bit floppy, it is a bit interesting to get them together. And as you can see in the line here, they still need a little bit of cleanup along this edge. You know, right in there, there is a tiny, tiny remnant of a sprue gate. This is one of those where cleanup has to be absolutely perfect. It's also fun to maintain the angles and get in here without getting glue on your fingers and thus fingerprints on the slat. Good news with all of this though is that the upper surface looks like that, and the upper surface is where most of the attention goes. So do a tiny bit of cleanup in here. For this, I don't want to go too heavy and ruin things, so I'm going to stick with a medium grit sanding stick and just I know there are lots of other options out there for sanding sticks, but for some reason I like these Flexifile ones the best. They seem to be a bit stiffer than other sanding sticks in terms of their sponginess. So they actually do bite into things instead of just curving around the exact detail you're trying to remove and sanding down other things instead. Now comes the fun part. So I'm going to first hit these main mounting holes, and we're just going to get this thing in place that way. Stupid floppy thing. See, this is why it's a pain in the ass, because it's basically got one side that you need to worry about, and the other side is open. And so it's like, come on, everything, get your shit together. Alright, so as you can see, this leaves this little seam line up here, and by a little bit of pressure we can close it. Before we do that though, we've got this end to worry about, so I'm going to go ahead and get in there and yoink. And we're going to go ahead and get the ball rolling on the seam. That's a little more glue than I wanted. As you can see, just a bit of pressure in here, and everything seems to be nice and happy. Alright, so that's looking happy-ish. We're going to come along here now. This is very much a matter of just going slow, following the line, providing just enough pressure there to help these pieces to grab each other. So now that we've got that more or less sorted, I'm going to go grab the Dremel and we're going to buff the fuck out of that. Okay, so we've got a cloth polishing wheel. This thing is always good for generating a shitload of static cling. But it's also good for smoothing out the plastic. So for the most part, it's looking pretty good, except this area right up here. So I'm going to grab my trusty number 11, or number 10, sorry. I like the curved ones better. And we're just going to come in here. Okay, so that's looking pretty decent. Now it is time to clean up this one, and then we'll mount them onto the Great Wall kit. Okay, so the way that these mount is pretty interesting. Look right here, and then over here, you got two little holes. And what happens is you start mounting it like this in one hole, and then you let the other hole sort of catch up. And then voila, you have leading edge slats. And then we can come in here, some extra thin. It's enough to get into the grooves here. I think I might try to switch to MEK just to give it a bit of an extra kick. Because this stuff cures faster. So that's pretty much all there is to it. Until we get to the bottom, of course. Ha ha. Okay, so the MEK did a fantastic job of getting these things locked in place. And this is one where I was very happy that I decided to not lock in the leading and trailing edges of the wings first, because it allowed me to go in here and set the depth, essentially, to match the slats. And while we're here, before we move on to the Kitty Hawk, I want to take a moment to point out these flaps. Not so much the underside, but look at the detail on the actuators right in there. That is just phenomenal. Now, these are also a bit dicey to place, so I would very much recommend not gluing in the trailing edge of the wing right here so that you have some wiggle room to get them in there. Also because these prongs face in the direction of the flaps, so they kind of face diagonally out this way, which is tough when you have, this whole piece here. You kind of have to finagle the flap into the wing, so having a little bit of wiggle room there to make that happen is much appreciated. And then once you have it in there like that, then you can go ahead and lock it in, which we're going to go ahead and do here in a little bit, but not yet, because I still want a little bit of flexibility as I clean up that little seam right there from building earlier. Something else that we need to do still is go ahead and lock in. You can see back here where the stabilators go. I have not glued that in yet, so that needs to be kind of clamped like that, essentially, on both sides. But first, let's go ahead and play with the Kitty Hawk for a few minutes. So how does the Kitty Hawk compare to the Great Wall kit? Well, namely, the leading edge slat is one piece. And the fit in here is a little bit dodgy. Just a little bit. You can see we've got a slightly larger gap up front there where we have to deal with the slight difference in the wings. Sigh. Again, another place where having a one-piece wing would have been fantastic. Also, I think, going to be a bit of depth fighting on this. You can see it helps to kind of lock in, again, the outer edge first and then bring it in. I think before I really get this going, I'm going to come in here and shave down a little bit of this. All right. Let's see if I can get a sanding stick in here without destroying too much stuff. Maybe this ugly bastard. So I hate these things because they're so damn rough, but it also means I don't care if I bend the shit out of them in order to get them where they need to go. See how that does. Lock in on the outside. Ah, that's better. Frustrating thing with this one is these pieces here, it's indicated that they're supposed to stay, but if we want to get these things into a neutral position, they might have to go. See if I can just get away with sanding it down a little bit. So I believe that is supposed to represent the same sort of little actuator thing as the element on the Great Wall kit. Oh yeah, that helps a lot. Look at that. It locks in a lot better up here in this front shoulder area. Yes, that's much better. Now comes the fun part of this thing. There's literally no way to hold this in place. Well, we glue it. So, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and yank that out so I don't damage it. See if I can get up in here. Alright. Now we're going to hope against hope that we don't do the fingerprint thing. Come on, there we go. MEK is a joy to work with. Perfecto. I'll check out the underside and see how it's coming there. I think that'll be best handled after we give the other side a little bit of time to set. Okay, now let's pay attention to the lower wing a little bit. Again, just pressure and chemicals. This side looks like it's going to be trickier because we've already got pretty good seals up against the main wing, and these little things don't quite know what to do. So, let's see what we can make happen. A little bit of sort of rotational pressure here as well. Come on. So close. Okay, there we go. Slats locked in place. Let's see what comes next. Okay, so now let's look at how to get the stabilators into the fuselage. This is a weird sort of thing. There's not really a good fit, essentially, but if you look in here, there's a hole. And there's another hole right, or a half of a hole right here. And so what you do is you basically get that inside pin into that hole, and then you kind of do like a shoulder rotation to get up and over and to fit the stabilator. Voila, there it is, in place. Now the question I have, and the reason that I'm not going to lock it in with glue yet, is it possible to do that with the tail installed? So that way we could keep these feasibly separate and paint the weird natural metal whatever's going on the front of the stabilators. So let's get out the tail and play around and see what we can see. Okay, so here we've got the core parts for the starboard tail. Now, essentially what we've got here, this sucker goes and sits on the outside of the tail. This part sits in here after we clean up the ejector pins. And then the whole thing just kind of drops into the side. So let's get these sprue gates and ejector pins out of the way first. All right, that piece looks good. This piece has, as you can see, just some absolutely massive sprue gates. So I hope I don't break my sprue cutters getting in here. Big chunkers. Come on. Dear God. All right. And it's looking like, based on the part here and the part here, that those are going to kind of come down on top of the stabilator mount, and so they won't be the kind of thing that you can go ahead and just strip off and put back on. Which, for the benefit of painting, is a bit frustrating because that's going to need some masking and all that good business. Alright, let's get these Gigantor pieces. That's a great place for one, isn't it? These fucking sprue gates, man. Yeah, it definitely looks like once you get that piece locked in, you're committed. So, unfortunately, just based on the way that this thing mounts, it looks like unless you're willing to cut some shit up back here, you're basically going for it. So what I'm gonna do is pull this guy back out, deal with this little area right here. As you can see, I don't quite have it fully pinched in, so we're gonna go ahead and do that. Now that we've got that in place, it's time to put this fucker back in, or like so. Now I'm just gonna do the lightest of tacks on this guy for now. All right. Now, just like so. And I believe this is the angle that this tail is supposed to sit at. As you can see in here, that is one nasty, nasty join. We can have to commit sometime, right? This is way more force than should be required for any of this bullshit. Especially when it's an area like this, it's really hard to get into without knocking shit around. For shits and giggles, I've gone ahead and placed one of the engine nozzles in place. And on the Great Wall kit, at least, it says in park position, it looks like the stabilator and the engine nozzle kind of have the same degree of tilt, which is about that, which I think looks pretty damn good. So, this one's still a little bit floppier than that. But yeah, that is going to be one nasty area to clean up. Yeesh. I think I'm liking Great Wall's approach in this better. Okay, so after all of that battling, two things have happened. First of all, that fucking dog finally shut up. Second of all, we have an assload of control surfaces in place. More than the camera can readily capture. So, up here, the leading edge slats, which were not as good a fit as I was hoping. There was a little tiny raised lip there, but I'm gonna live with that. We also have the flaps, which can still miraculously come in and out. We've got the stabilators, which for the moment at least still pivot. They pivot really sloppily, so there's kind of like up and way ass down. So we're gonna have to glue those in eventually. I've gone ahead and placed the engines in here just for shits and giggles. They're just taped at the moment. As you can see, though, there's going to need to be a little bit of a come to Jesus moment in terms of how those sync up. And then we've got the tails, which with that sort of side drop-in type thing leads to a really nasty, fun to clean up area right in here that just happens to be surrounded by a whole bunch of detail. So that's going to be fun to sort out. Okay, so that's the Kitty Hawk kit. Now let's go ahead and bring in the Great Wall Hobby Su-35 and see how it approaches these same control surfaces. Well, we've got the Kitty Hawk all tailed up, so now it's time to play around with the Great Wall kit. And it takes a slightly different approach. So where the Kitty Hawk kit had those one-piece tails that sort of clamped onto the side, as you can see right here, the Great Wall kit has a much more traditional sort of tab and slot arrangement. The tails are two-piece, so there's the outer piece and there's a sort of interior inset piece. And these actually, shut up compressor, these actually go together quite well. It's very much a press fit ordeal, like so. You've got the tabs on here. These actually have required a little bit of cleanup here on the bottom just because, you know, sprue gates and all that stuff. Here's where it gets interesting. You've got this into the tab right here, like so. Now, I've done the best I can gluing these little flank pieces in to the sides. And what happens with the one on the starboard side here, if you look side on, you can see we've got, it's floating a little bit up top, but if we push it down there, it floats in the back. So we've got, hey, what's going on here, right? So it's gonna take some downward pressure, but if, let's see if I can get the camera to show this angle here. If you look right along there, it's actually sticking out just a little tiny bit, which is something that we don't want. Now, you can kind of fix it somewhat with the angle, but the angle honestly doesn't help up front. So when you start bending it, that wonderful little joint area there sort of falls apart on you. Plus, you know, this isn't an F-18 Hornet. Tails are relatively vertical, as you can see right there. Now, this problem over here of it sticking out is not a problem over here. Over here, it is floppy, except something interesting happens when we come in here, press on the side. Everything locks into a happy place. As you can see, it is a much cleaner joint over here, pretty much dead on all the way along here. There's none of that little step going on. So I'm definitely happy with how this one is looking. However, this is a bit frustrating because I don't want to be dealing with the slant of the tails or any of that. I kind of wish that Great Wall had found a cleaner way to go about this. Honestly, I'm not sure what other options there are, other than perhaps getting rid of this whole business here and having this be treated in a different way, where maybe instead of having the sort of tab and slot thing, it's more of a post. I don't know. You know, it's the sort of 2 or 3 posts and it can kind of like slot in there. But then you're not fighting this weird flank ordeal. I don't know. It's a bit frustrating. So, how are we going to approach this? Well, I think the port side is pretty well sorted. It's just a matter of kind of getting it on there and squeezing at the right moments and in the right places. On the starboard side, where we've got that little lip, so you can see how hard these things are to get back apart. So on the starboard side, I noticed something else. It's the thickness of the that mounting tab when you have the 2 of them combined, because when you just have the one, look at that, everything is, you know, pretty well sorted. Not perfect, but it's closer. So I think that might be some salvation for us. And then so I've tried shaving this down, but I can't quite get there with it, so I think it might literally come down to just removing that tab altogether. Let's go ahead and do that. Where's my other... Now, happily, this is well inside of the actual tail, so we can safely remove this and not really worry too much about any kind of destruction to the surface line there. But I'm still going to go slow and hack it up the old-fashioned way. Come in here with a little tiny bit of sanding. It sounds like a 6 seal. Let's try that again. Okay, so the next thing that we have to do, right in here, right along this edge, is lifting just a little tiny bit. So if we can knock that down just a hair, that should help us a lot. Yeah, that is looking definitely better. A little bit more, I think we'll be there. Okay, so now that we're happy with the way that it's sitting in the wing, it's time to come in here and do a little bit of glue bombing. With the MEK. Now there are plenty of little details on these that still need to be sorted out. Some little scoops that go up here, some shit on the back of the antenna, or on the, some antennas on the back of the fin, all that good stuff. But I want to get the main stuff sorted first, then we can worry about the details. Okay, it's time for the moment of truth. Time to glue the tails onto the Great Wall kit. So I'm going to start with some Tamiya Extra Thin in the tab, and then I'm going to follow along with MEK on the outside. The Extra Thin is much slower, still fast, but nowhere near as fast as the MEK, so I'll give us a little bit more time to get things situated. And once that sets, we can go ahead and move on to the back and kind of get it all locked down. It's frustrating that we have to go in this path, but whatever needs to happen, right? Stop focusing on that shit. Focus up here. There you go. Okay, so I've got it glued in. It's not the prettiest of joins, but it's in place. So we're going to hold this here for a few more moments just to make sure everything locks in, and then we're going to go ahead and get the other side. Now I know I've been doing one side and then move on and boom, suddenly everything is locked in place, kind of symmetrically across the aircraft. This time I'm going to show both because we have to treat the sides differently. Right, that seems pretty happy. On to port. Now let's go ahead and lock the inside in place. Overall, the port side is going a lot better than starboard side. I think the biggest problem on this kit from a fit perspective is basically this area from the rudder back where you have, you know, the cover for the stabilators and all that stuff. This would have been maybe if, you know, if they'd done that as a separate piece and there's a little panel line there. I don't know. You know, or maybe they divide it here where the strake goes. So the strake mounts underneath here. So maybe they mount it, you know, with this line coming up here. And this is its own sort of separate insert piece. And then the rest of it just does its thing. Who knows, that might have been a cleaner design. Okay, well the tail's set up, we're going to go ahead and knock out the stabilators for the Great Wall kit. Now these, as you can see, definitely take a different approach to the Kitty Hawk. The Kitty Hawk had basically this full area here intact, and you just kind of plopped in the little, I don't know, hinge cover thing, whatever. This one has a separate piece. Needs a little tiny bit more mold edge cleanup here. It's not really flash, it's just kind of a little ridge that you can't see, but you can sure as shit feel. So this literally just goes on there. Okay. And then this little hump piece. Just comes on top. Literally drops down over top like that. That is literally all there is to it. Now the nice thing about this versus the Kitty Hawk kit, with the Kitty Hawk kit you had to install these from the back and then put the tails on. You were basically stuck. With these, as you can see, with this little pop post essentially, I don't know what the hell those are called technically, but you know, it looks like something out of IKEA or Lego or something. And the idea with this is something you can already see in practice over here on the port side where it is installed, and we can move it. Let's zoom out just a little bit so we can see better. So we can move it as we need to. Seems to sit happiest sort of at neutral, but if we need to, we can do it pull back or position forward, whatever. And we can pull it back off for painting and all that. Now this one over here should have the same sort of thing, so come on. There we go. It's a bit of a rough slide in place, but once it's there, it seems pretty happy. And with that, the Great Wall flanker has control surfaces. Unlike the other installments so far, Great Wall doesn't necessarily emerge as the clear victor in this case. They do some things better than Kitty Hawk, and they do some things worse. And I think it's probably about a wash when you take it all into account. So the leading edge slats, I think, are nicely detailed and perhaps a little bit better detailed and better fitting than the Kitty Hawk kits. However, they are two pieces, and dealing with that second piece and that join is tedious at best. I will give them credit though, they did not join at the actual leading edge, but a little bit back of it, right in here. Good on them for that. However, getting these together was fussy. There's not a lot of places to really get a grip on this while you're gluing it without getting fingerprints in places. And also, notably, if you are, well, you're going to have to put the slats on the thing if you build it. I would recommend not gluing the leading edge of the wing itself and saving that until you go to install these so you can depth match across. Because if I had glued that stuff down beforehand, that would have been very dicey for getting the slats to match up. If we look at the flaps back here, these have the exact same arrangement as the Kitty Hawk, with, you can see the actuator pins right there, facing essentially perpendicular to the flap line as opposed to straight along the airframe. Only problem with that is if you go back this way, what do you hit? You hit the fucking fuselage. So mounting these is interesting just because of that, because you know, you've got these pins that are a certain length long, and getting them in and out is tedious and annoying when you have the fuselage right there. Would have been easy to just go straight, and that way you can just kind of, you know, in and out, but that is not the way that it went down. So, okay then. Now if we look back here at the stabilators, as I mentioned when I was talking about the Kitty Hawk kit, these seem to be, come on, let's see if we can focus on, you can see here there is detail, but the detail appears to be rather shallow and indistinct compared to, say, what's going on in the wings. And that's a bit frustrating because there's a, shut up compressor, because there's a lot of deliciousness that happens here with that metal and the whatever coating is on it that seems to degrade over time. A lot of potential to really show that off, but it's hard to show it off when you've got, you know, this shallow, vague, indistinct detail. So, from a detail perspective, Kitty Hawk definitely wins this match. However, these are designed in such a way that you can, you know, basically pull them out back here and then pop them out, take them, paint them separately, and come pop them back in. So, kudos to Great Wall for that design thinking. Then we have the tails. And as with Kitty Hawk, this is an engineering challenge that I don't think they necessarily lived up to the way they have elsewhere in the kit. Namely, they chose to put the tail on top of this line right here, a very prominent line that isn't even really hidden by the stabilators or the flaps, which means we're going to get to clean that up, and that's going to be fun because there is a lot of very fine detail that is going to be obliterated in there. So basically they have you put this sort of inner core of the tail into the outer piece and just drop them down. There are slots in the top of the fuselage there, but you have to align not only the sort of downward fit to align with the fuselage, you have to also maintain that line right there, which is not exactly a given when you're installing it. So, on this one we had to literally cut away the mounting tab from the inside portion of the tail so that we could have enough width to work with there, because otherwise it was pushing the outside tail out over the fuselage, which is bad. So a way to fix this, well, Kitty Hawk actually showed us the way, and it's something I might consider if I were to build this again. I don't know exactly how feasible it would be to carry it off, but they have a piece that starts up here at the gear bay and continues all the way back to the tail, and where the stabilator mounts, and then it comes all the way up here, and it's a sort of outer facing piece, and it actually forms the outer wall of the slot where the tail installs. Now, if I were doing this again, I would try taking these tails and gluing them to that, and then installing all of that at once and see how that goes. That might not entirely be doable because you have to deal with going essentially up and in at the same time. It's the same problem that we had with installing these onto these one-piece engine and intake trunks, where you have pins that need to go 90-degree directions from each other at the same time. But I do think it would be entirely possible for Kitty Hawk but I do think it would be entirely possible for Great Wall Hobby to essentially rethink this piece. If guys, if you are planning, I don't know, an Su-34 or an Su-27 of some kind, something with similar tail arrangements, maybe consider redoing this part and having all of this sort of flank piece and the outer tail being one thing. It would make this whole section a huge improvement, and from what I understand, I haven't built it, but AMK's MiG-31 apparently takes some approach similar to that. So that is the Great Wall kit, and now it is time to move on to whatever comes next. But in closing, I have to say that I think when it comes to the slats and tails and stabs and flaps and whatnot, it's pretty much a draw between these two kits. Both of them do a couple of really great things, and both of them also suck in a few places. So until next time.